in deference to the welfare and tranquility of the entire family. When the situation had been explained to Jesus, he was always intelligently and willingly cooperative with the parental wishes and family regulations. Much of his spare time, when his mother did not require his help about the house, was spent studying the flowers and plants by day and the stars by night. He evinced a troublesome penchant for lying on his back and gazing wonderingly up into the starry heavens long after his usual bedtime in this well-ordered Nazareth household. 4. The 7th year, A.D. 1. This was indeed an eventful year in Jesus' life. Early in January, a great snowstorm occurred in Galilee. Snow fell 2 feet deep, the heaviest snowfall Jesus saw during his lifetime, and one of the deepest at Nazareth in 100 years. The play life of Jewish children in the times of Jesus was rather circumscribed. All too often the children played at the more serious things they observed their elders doing. They played much at weddings and funerals, ceremonies which they so frequently saw and which were so spectacular. They danced and sang, but had few organized games, such as children of later days so much enjoy. Jesus, in company with a neighbor boy and later his brother James, delighted to play in the far corner of the family carpenter shop, where they had great fun with the shavings and the blocks of wood. It was always difficult for Jesus to comprehend the harm of certain sorts of play which were forbidden on the Sabbath, but he never failed to conform to his parents' wishes. He had a capacity for humor and play which was afforded little opportunity for expression in the environment of his day and generation, but up to the age of 14 he was cheerful and light-hearted most of the time. Mary maintained a dovecote on top of the animal house adjoining the home, and they used the profits from the sale of doves as a special charity fund, which Jesus administered after he deducted the tithe and turned it over to the officer of the synagogue. The only real accident Jesus had up to this time was a fall down the backyard stone stairs which led up to the canvas-roofed bedroom. It happened during an unexpected July sandstorm from the east. The hot winds, carrying blasts of fine sand, usually blew during the rainy season, especially in March and April. It was extraordinary to have such a storm in July. When the storm came up, Jesus was on the housetop playing, as was his habit, for during much of the dry season this was his accustomed playroom. He was blinded by the sand when descending the stairs and fell. After this accident, Joseph built a balustrade up both sides of the stairway. There was no way in which this accident could have been prevented. It was not chargeable to neglect by the midway temporal guardians, one primary and one secondary midwayer having been assigned to the watch care of the lad. Neither was it chargeable to the guardian seraphim. It simply could not have been avoided. But this slight accident, occurring while Joseph was absent in Endor, caused such great anxiety to develop in Mary's mind that she unwisely tried to keep Jesus very close to her side for some months. Material accidents, commonplace occurrences of a physical nature, are not arbitrarily interfered with by celestial personalities. Under ordinary circumstances, only midway creatures can intervene in material conditions to safeguard the persons of men and women of destiny, and even in special situations these beings can so act only in obedience to the specific mandates of their superiors. And this was but one of a number of such minor accidents which subsequently befell this inquisitive and adventurous youth. If you envisage the average childhood and youth of an aggressive boy, you will have a fairly good idea of the youthful career of Jesus, and you will be able to imagine just how much anxiety he caused his parents, particularly his mother. The fourth member of the Nazareth family, Joseph, was born Wednesday morning, March 16, A.D. 1. 5. School days in Nazareth. Jesus was now 7 years old, the age when Jewish children were supposed to begin their formal education in the synagogue schools. Accordingly, in August of this year he entered upon his eventful school life at Nazareth. Already this lad was a fluent reader, writer, and speaker of 2 languages, Aramaic and Greek. He was now to acquaint himself with the task of learning to read, write, and speak the Hebrew language, and he was truly eager for the new school life which was ahead of him. For 3 years, until he was 10, he attended the elementary school of the Nazareth synagogue. For these 3 years he studied the rudiments of the book of the law, as it was recorded in the Hebrew tongue. For the following 3 years he studied in the advanced school and committed to memory, by the method of repeating aloud, the deeper teachings of the sacred law. He graduated from this school of the synagogue during his 13th year, and was turned over to his parents by the synagogue rulers as an educated son of the commandment, henceforth a responsible citizen of the Commonwealth of Israel, all of which entailed his attendance at the Passovers in Jerusalem. Accordingly, he attended his first Passover that year in company with his father and mother. At Nazareth the pupils sat on the floor in a semicircle, while their teacher, the Shazan, an officer of the synagogue, sat facing them. Beginning with the book of Leviticus, they passed on to the study of the other books of the law, followed by the study of the prophets and the Psalms. The Nazareth synagogue possessed a complete copy of the Scriptures in Hebrew. Nothing but the Scriptures was studied prior to the 12th year. In the summer months the hours for school were greatly shortened. Jesus early became a master of Hebrew, and as a young man, when no visitor of prominence happened to be sojourning in Nazareth, he would often be asked to read the Hebrew Scriptures to the faithful assembled in the synagogue at the regular Sabbath services. These synagogue schools, of course, had no textbooks. In teaching, the Shazan would utter a statement, while the pupils would in unison repeat it after him. When having access to the written books of the law, the student learned his lesson by reading aloud and by constant repetition. Next, in addition to his more formal schooling, Jesus began to make contact with human nature from the 4 quarters of the earth as men from many lands passed in and out of his Father's repair shop. When he grew older, he mingled freely with the caravans as they tarried near the spring for rest and nourishment. Being a fluent speaker of Greek, he had little trouble in conversing with the majority of the caravan travelers and conductors. Nazareth was a caravan way station and crossroads of travel, and largely Gentile in population. At the same time, it was widely known as a center of liberal interpretation of Jewish traditional law. In Galilee, the Jews mingled more freely with the Gentiles than was their practice in Judea, and of all the cities of Galilee, the Jews of Nazareth were the most liberal in their interpretation of the social restrictions based on the fears of contamination as a result of contact with the Gentiles. And these conditions gave rise to the common saying in Jerusalem, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Jesus received his moral training and spiritual culture chiefly in his own home. He secured much of his intellectual and theological education from the Shazan. But his real education, that equipment of mind and heart for the actual test of grappling with the difficult problems of life, he obtained by mingling with his fellow men. It was this close association with his fellow men, young and old, Jew and Gentile, that afforded him the opportunity to know the human race. Jesus was highly educated in that he thoroughly understood men and devotedly loved them. Throughout his years at the synagogue, he was a brilliant student, possessing a great advantage since he was conversant with 3 languages. The Nazareth Shazan, on the occasion of Jesus' finishing the course in his school, remarked to Joseph that he feared he had learned more from Jesus' searching questions than he had been able to teach the lad. Throughout his course of study, Jesus learned much and derived great inspiration from the regular Sabbath sermons in the synagogue. It was customary to ask distinguished visitors stopping over the Sabbath in Nazareth to address the synagogue. As Jesus grew up, he heard many great thinkers of the entire Jewish world expound their views, and many also who were hardly Orthodox Jews, since the synagogue of Nazareth was an advanced and liberal center of Hebrew thought and culture. When entering school at 7 years, at this time the Jews had just inaugurated a compulsory education law, it was customary for the pupils to choose their birthday text, a sort of golden rule to guide them throughout their studies, one upon which they often expatiated at their graduation when 13 years old. The text which Jesus chose was from the prophet Isaiah. "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the meek, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and to set the spiritual prisoners free." Nazareth was one of the 24 priest centers of the Hebrew nation, but the Galilean priesthood was more liberal in the interpretation of the traditional laws than were the Judean scribes and rabbis, and at Nazareth they were also more liberal regarding the observance of the Sabbath. It was therefore the custom